She sold her mother's wedding ring. She sold the piano. She sold everything she had ever loved just to buy a train ticket to marry a stranger. And when she finally arrived after traveling 2,000 miles across the country, he looked at her for exactly 10 seconds. Then he handed her a piece of paper that said she was not suitable, and he left her standing at a crossroads in the middle of a blizzard that would kill her within the hour. She had no money, no shelter, no way home. The temperature was dropping fast, and death was coming for her. But what Owen Blackledge did not know was that by throwing her away like garbage, he had just delivered her straight to the door of the only man who would ever truly love her. And that decision would be his biggest mistake. Because this woman was about to destroy everything he had built. This is not just a love story. This is a story about revenge, about justice, about a woman who refused to be bought or sold or broken. Stay until the end. Because what happens to Owen Blackledge is something you do not want to miss. This story teaches us a powerful truth. Sometimes the worst moment of your life is actually the beginning of something beautiful. When someone rejects you, they are not defining your worth. They are simply removing themselves from your future. The people who throw you away are making room for the people who will treasure you. Never let anyone make you feel like you are not enough. Your value does not decrease based on someone's inability to see it. If this story touched your heart, do me a small favor. Hit that like button so more people can find this message. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever had something bad happen that turned out to be a blessing in disguise? I would love to hear your story. And if you have not subscribed yet, join our family. We share stories like this every week. Stories about love, justice, and the strength of the human spirit. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. You never know whose life you might change. Now let us begin. The wind came down from the mountains like a living thing that night. It clawed at the pine roof of Eli Mercer's cabin and made the logs groan like they might split apart. The storm had been building since noon, and by nightfall it howled through the valley like winter had brought every demon it owned. Eli sat close to the iron stove, pushing a needle through torn leather, while a coffee pot bubbled dark and bitter on the stove top. His hands stayed steady despite the noise outside. 35 winters in Wyoming territory had taught him one simple truth. The weather did not care if a man was tired or alone. Complaining never warmed a room. He was stitching a snapped bridle for his young mare because good leather was too costly to waste, especially with spring still months away. The work kept his hands busy and his mind quiet. That was how Eli liked things, quiet. Then came a knock. It was so weak he thought it was just a branch hitting the door. But the second knock made him set down his work and reach for his Winchester rifle. He checked the load out of habit. Nobody traveled in weather like this unless death was chasing them. And out here, death usually won. Eli moved to the door and called out, "Who is there?" The answer came thin and broken through the howling wind, a woman's voice, barely holding together. "Please, help me." When Eli pulled the door open, the storm tried to tear it from his hands. A figure stood on his threshold like the blizzard had tried to bury her and failed. Her dark blue wool dress was frozen stiff. Ice clung to her hair, which might have been auburn under all that frost. One hand clutched a small carpet bag like it held the last valuable thing in creation. Eli did not ask questions. Questions could wait until after a body was saved from freezing. He grabbed her arm, thin even through the frozen wool, and pulled her inside. He fought the door closed behind them. She stood shaking so hard her teeth made a small music. Her lips were past blue, a color that scared him more than any winter storm. Eli turned his back, grabbed a spare flannel shirt from a peg, and held it out behind him. "Change now," he said firmly. "Wet clothes will kill you faster than a bullet out here." He heard the carpet bag drop. Frozen buttons struggled under stiff fingers. Eli kept his eyes on the wall and fed more wood into the stove until it roared with heat. When the rustling stopped, he turned around. She stood wrapped in his shirt, which hung to her knees. Her frozen dress lay in a heap on the floor like a shed skin. Eli pulled a wool blanket from his bed and held it out. She took it with hands that could not quite close right. He guided her to the chair nearest the stove. Then he poured hot coffee into a tin cup. She drank with shaking hands. King. Slowly, color returned to her face. Not much, but enough to tell him she might live through the night. Eli ladled bean soup from the pot that always sat at the back of the stove. It was thick with salt pork and the last vegetables that had not gone soft. She ate like someone who had forgotten what food was, then remembered. When she finished, Eli finally asked the question that had been burning in his mind. "Why are you here, out in a storm like this?" Her eyes were green like summer sage when they were not shadowed by exhaustion. She met his gaze straight on. No tears, no begging, just truth. "Owen Blackledge brought me from Boston to be his wife," she said quietly. "He changed his mind at the crossroads, said I was not suitable for ranch life. He gave me coach fare back east and left me there." Eli knew Owen Blackledge. Biggest spread in the valley. The man ran cattle and men with the same heavy hand. He had more money than conscience and more power than sense. Eli also knew the crossroads. They were 3 miles away. And tonight, the cold could kill a person in minutes. "You walked from the crossroads in this weather?" Eli asked, trying to keep the anger out of his voice. She pulled an envelope from her carpet bag with fingers still clumsy from the cold. "There is no coach until the storm passes. If it passes, the station master said maybe a week. The hotel wanted payment in advance. The fare was not enough for both a room and food." She did not cry. She did not beg. She spoke like she was reading a bill of sale, matter of fact, already accepting her fate. Eli respected that, more than he could say. "Mail order bride," he said. It was not a question. "I was," she answered. "Now I am just someone who sold everything to buy passage to marry a stranger. A stranger who took one look at me and decided against the purchase." The wind screamed louder outside. Eli checked the shutters and added another log to the fire. His cattle would be fine. He had laid straw and filled the water troughs that morning. But this woman had almost frozen to death because Owen Blackledge did not like what he saw, and that made Eli angrier than he had been in years. "My name is Eli Mercer," he said finally. "This is my place. You are welcome to shelter until the weather breaks." "Margaret Doyle," she replied, "but everyone calls me Maggie." She looked around the one-room cabin. It was neat as a pin. Tools hung on pegs. The rifle rested over the door. A bed sat in the corner. Everything had its place. "I can work for my keep," she said. "Cook, clean, mend. I will not be a burden." "Nobody is talking about burden," Eli said firmly. "A storm like this, the Christian thing is giving shelter." Something bitter touched her voice when she repeated his words. "The Christian thing. Mr. Blackledge goes to church every Sunday, I'm told." Eli did not comment on that. Owen's church life was between Owen and God. But Eli had his own thoughts about men who prayed on Sunday and left women to die on Monday. "You take the bed," Eli said, changing the subject. "I will sleep by the stove." "I could not," she protested. "You could, and you will," he replied. "I have slept on harder ground than this plenty of times." Later, as the cabin settled into night and the storm kept throwing itself at the walls, Maggie's voice came soft from the bed. "Why did you not ask more questions about why he really sent me away?" Eli stared at the stove's red glow. He thought about his answer for a long moment before speaking. "A man's reasons are his own," he said. "But I know Owen Blackledge. He does not do anything without profit in mind. A pretty woman from Boston shows up and he sends her packing in a killing storm." He paused. "That is not about you being unsuitable. That is about something else entirely." There was a long silence, only wind and creaking timber. Then her voice came again, barely above a whisper. "You think I am pretty?" Eli did not turn around. "I think you are alive," he said quietly. "In a storm like this, that is what matters." She made a sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been crying. Eli could not tell which. He lay still in his buffalo robe by the stove and listened to her breathing grow steadier. Outside, the blizzard raged like it had a personal grudge against everyone still breathing. But inside, the cabin was warm, safe. And for the first time in 35 years, Eli Mercer was not alone. He was not sure yet whether that was a good thing or a dangerous one. But as sleep finally claimed him, he had a feeling his quiet life was about to change forever. Near dawn, the wind eased a little, though snow still fell thick and heavy. Eli rose quiet as a ghost, rebuilt the fire, and started coffee and biscuits. He moved the way a man moves when he has done the same morning routine for decades. No wasted motion, no noise. Maggie woke to the smell of food. She sat up in his bed with the quilt around her shoulders, looking around like she needed a moment to remember where she was. Her hair, dry now, was chestnut with threads of copper running through it. She had tried to braid it, but loose pieces escaped like they had their own opinion. "The storm is breaking," Eli said without turning around. "But it will be days before the road's clear." Maggie nodded and came to the table in bare feet, still wearing his flannel shirt under the quilt. They ate biscuits and gravy in silence. The cabin felt cut off from the world, like they were the only two people left alive. After breakfast, she began washing dishes without being told. She moved like she had always lived in a cabin, like she had always belonged near a stove. Eli watched her for a moment, the straight set of her back, the steady work of her hands, the quiet courage in the way she faced this hard new life. Outside, the frost-covered world lay buried and waiting. Inside, Eli felt something shift in his chest, something he could not quite name. His quiet solitude had ended the moment she knocked on his door. And somewhere out in the snow, 3 miles away or 30, Owen Blackledge's choices were still moving through the valley like a dark shadow, headed straight for this cabin. On the 4th morning, Maggie pulled out a stack of letters from her carpet bag. She laid them on the rough pine table like evidence in a trial. Each one was carefully straightened, the corners lined up perfectly, as if order could keep her heart from shaking. Eli watched without speaking. A man learned to stay quiet when someone was holding pain like that. "He wrote these over 2 months," Maggie said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. "He promised a good home, respect, a proper wedding come spring. He said he needed a wife who could read and write, someone to help with the ranch accounts." Eli picked up the first letter. Owen Blackledge's heavy script marched across expensive paper. All honey-sweet words and careful promises. The letters painted a picture of a man who wanted companionship, not a servant. Eli had known Owen long enough to smell a lie through a closed door. "My father died in October," Maggie continued. She stared at the letters like they were poison. Debts took everything. The house in Beacon Hill, the furniture, even my mother's piano. I had enough saved from teaching to eat for maybe a month. Then I saw his advertisement in the Boston Globe. She unfolded a newspaper clipping and smoothed it with her palm. Eli read the words that had changed her life. "Prosperous rancher with established holdings seeks educated woman of good character for matrimony. Must be willing to relocate to Wyoming territory. References required. Proper arrangements guaranteed." "You answered," Eli said quietly. "I answered," Maggie confirmed. "I sent references from my school, from our minister, from my father's business partner. I did everything right." Eli's jaw tightened. He had watched men like Owen buy and sell other people's lives the same way they bought and sold cattle. It made his blood run hot. Maggie pointed to the last piece of paper in the stack. It was newer than the others, creased sharp like it had been folded in anger. "This is what he handed me at the crossroads," she said. Eli read it slowly, feeling the heat rise in his chest. "Agreement terminated due to unsuitability for ranch requirements. Coach fare enclosed for return passage. No further obligation on either party. Owen's signature cut across the bottom like a slash. Cold. Final. The kind of words a man uses when he wants to wash his hands of something. Unsuitability, Eli said. He looked at Maggie over the paper. Really looked at her. Her hands were clean, yes, but not soft. Her eyes were clear and intelligent. Her spine did not bend, even after everything she had been through. You are plenty suitable for ranch life. Apparently not, Maggie said. She folded the paper with careful fingers. I was just paperwork, something to fit into a plan. Eli held out his hand. Do not fold it. Keep it flat. Paper has a way of mattering when a man starts twisting stories. Maggie hesitated, then laid the termination letter back down on the table. Flat. Ready to be used. Eli poured fresh coffee and leaned his hip against the table. Tell me exactly what happened at Roland Station. Maggie's eyes went distant, like she was seeing the moment all over again. He was there when I stepped off the train. He looked at me for about 10 seconds. His face changed like he had ordered beef and gotten mutton instead. She swallowed hard. He did not take my trunk. He did not even ask my name again. He handed me that paper and told the driver to wait because I would be going back east. Did he say why? Said I was too thin, too refined, that he needed someone sturdier. Maggie's mouth tightened, like a horse, like a tool. Eli made a dry sound in his throat. He has got hired hands and a cook. He does not need a wife to lift feed sacks. He needed something else. Maggie looked at him, and the intelligence in her eyes made Eli feel like she could see straight through timber. Land, she said quietly. It is always land out here. Eli nodded slowly. Owen has been buying up spreads along Sweetwater Creek for years, but he cannot buy what men will not sell. Me. The Johnsons upstream. Tom Garrett downriver. The water sits between us like a locked gate. He paused. A railroad man came through last summer and suddenly water became gold. Maggie's breath caught. You think he needed a wife for a land claim? Maybe, Eli said honestly. Lying to her would be another kind of cruelty, and she had had enough of that. There is talk about laws changing. Married men sometimes get different rights, partnerships, paperwork, deals. Owen does not spend train money and write love letters unless he expects profit. Maggie stood fast, as if her legs could not hold the weight of her anger. She walked to the frost-edged window. Outside snow fell gentle now, soft as feathers, making the world look clean when it was not. I sold my mother's wedding ring, she said to the glass. I sold her books, her sewing basket. I gave away everything I could not carry. I bought proper dresses because he told me what a ranch wife should wear. Her voice cracked just once. It was all for nothing. Eli wanted to touch her shoulder. He wanted to say words that would fix everything. But words did not fix what Owen had done. So instead, he told her the truth. You took a chance to survive, he said quietly. That is not foolish. That is brave. Maggie turned back. Tears shone in her eyes, but they did not fall. Why are you helping me? Really? Eli swallowed. He had spent most of his adult life alone, by choice, because loneliness felt safer than hoping for anything more. But this woman had walked into his cabin like the storm had delivered her on purpose. My mother came out here as a bride, he said finally. Not mail order, but close enough. She married my father after knowing him 3 weeks because her family needed the bride price. She made a life anyway. Made this place something more than land and cattle. He glanced around the cabin at the curtains his mother had sewn. The books she had insisted mattered. The small touches that made a hard place feel human. She died when I was 12, Eli continued. But she left her mark on everything here. Maggie's face softened in a way that made Eli's chest tighten. So you know what it is to be brought here on promises, she said softly. I know what it is when a woman is treated like an item, Eli replied. And I know what it does to a boy who watches it happen. The stove popped and settled. The cabin felt quieter than it had all week. Something had changed between them, something neither of them was ready to name yet. That night, Maggie pulled a small wooden spoon from her bag. It was carved with flowers along the handle. Delicate work. "This was my mother's," she said. "The only thing I kept that was not practical." Eli turned it in his hands. The carving was fine, patient work. "Not foolish," he said. "Sometimes a person needs something beautiful just to remember beauty exists." He handed it back. Then he took out his whittling knife and a piece of pine from the kindling box. Without a word, he began to carve. His hands moved sure and steady, shaving curls of wood that fell to the floor like pale ribbons. After a while, he held out a simple spoon, smooth and balanced. "For you," he said, "for your coffee." Maggie took it like it was made of gold. Her eyes shone and her cheeks colored like sunrise. "Different kinds of beauty," she whispered, running her fingers along the fresh wood. "Different kinds of useful," Eli agreed. "Those are not different things." And in that moment, without either of them saying it out loud, a connection was formed, fragile as a first frost. But real. They fell into a rhythm after that. A rhythm that felt surprisingly natural for two strangers trapped together by weather. Morning came with Eli breaking ice on the water bucket and Maggie stirring oats on the stove. No discussion needed. They moved around each other like people who had learned the same music from different places. Maggie mended torn shirts while Eli repaired tack for his horses. She taught him to make bread starter in a crock by the stove. He carved her a bread paddle from pine, the handle fitting her grip like he had known her hands longer than a week. They worked. They ate. They learned each other's silences. On the fifth day, Eli came in from checking on the livestock to find Maggie rearranging his small collection of books. She had them sorted by size, then changed her mind and sorted them by subject instead. When she noticed him watching, her cheeks went pink. "I apologize," she said quickly. "I should not have touched your things." Eli shrugged. "Books do not mind being touched. My mother sorted them the same way. By subject." He paused. "You can read them if you want. Long days stuck inside can wear on a person." Maggie's face lit up in a way that made Eli's chest do something strange. "Really? Really? Just put them back when you are done." That night she read aloud by the fire. Poetry. Something about a road not taken. Her voice was clear and steady, the kind of voice that had taught children how to read. Eli listened while he worked leather, and for the first time in 35 years the cabin did not feel empty. But the easy peace could not last. Wyoming winters were not kind, and neither was fate. The cold snapped harder than it had all winter on the 7th night. The temperature dropped so fast that the cabin creaked like it was complaining in its bones. Nails popped in the walls like small gunshots. Frost crept across the inside of the windows in patterns that looked almost like reaching fingers. Eli built the fire high, but the cold still found every crack in the logs. He heard Maggie trying to hide her shivering in the bed. The sound of her teeth chattering made his stomach clench. "This is foolish," she finally said into the dark. "You take your bed back. I will sit by the fire." "Neither of us is freezing for the sake of propriety," Eli replied firmly. But even with more wood, the cold was winning. By midnight, Eli was shaking under his buffalo robe, and Maggie had gone so quiet it scared him. "Maggie," he said softly, "I am awake." Her voice came small and tight. "So am I." Eli made a choice then. A choice that would have shocked church folks, but might keep them alive. "I'm going to sit on the bed on top of the covers," he said carefully. "We will share the buffalo robe. Body heat works better than pride." Silence stretched thick as snow between them. Then Maggie said quietly, "All right." Eli sat against the headboard and pulled the heavy robe over both of them. Maggie was warm but trembling, a small weight at his side. He put his arm around her shoulders. Careful, steady, not taking anything, only giving warmth. Slowly, Her shaking eased. "Better?" he asked. "Yes," she whispered. They sat like that through the darkest hours, listening to the wind in the stove and the slow breath of the cabin holding together against the cold. Somewhere in those quiet hours, Eli realized he was not just keeping her warm. He was keeping watch, protecting her. And it felt right in a way nothing had felt right in years. Near dawn, Maggie's head slipped onto his shoulder. She fell asleep there, and Eli stayed still as stone, afraid to move, afraid to break whatever fragile trust had grown between them in the cold. When she woke, she pulled back quick. Her cheeks flushed red with embarrassment, but she did not look away. "Thank you," she said softly. "We survived," Eli replied. "That is what matters." They did not speak of it as they went through morning chores. But something had shifted between them. The careful distance still existed, but now it was chosen. When their hands brushed passing the coffee pot, neither of them flinched. That afternoon, as Maggie watched snow melt off the pine branches outside, her voice came quiet and worried. "Eli," she said, "what if Owen comes looking for me?" Eli looked at her, and his face went hard in a way she had not seen before. "Then he will find you safe," he said firmly. "Warm, protected." His hand rested near the Winchester like it belonged there. A man cannot throw away a life and then claim it back when it suits him. Maggie's eyes flashed with something fierce. "I am not something to be claimed," she said. Eli nodded once. "No," he agreed. "You are not." Outside, the wind lifted again. It rattled the door in its frame like a warning, reminding them both that winter was not finished, and neither was Owen Blackledge. 3 more days passed. The snow began to melt in patches. The roads were almost clear, and Eli knew their borrowed time was running out. On the 10th morning, he made a decision. "I need to ride to town," he told Maggie over breakfast. "Get supplies, check on things." He paused. "You can stay here if you want. You will be safe." Maggie shook her head. "I have been hiding long enough. I will come with you." Eli studied her face. She looked different than she had that first night. Stronger, less like a woman who had given up, and more like a woman ready to fight. "All right," he said, "but stay close to me." The ride to town took 2 hours through melting snow. Maggie sat behind Eli on his big gray mare, her arms around his waist for balance. She did not complain about the cold or the rough ride. She just held on and kept her eyes open. The town was small but busy. People moved between buildings with purpose, making up for lost time after the storm. A few heads turned when Eli rode in with a strange woman, but nobody said anything out loud, at least not yet. Eli stopped first at the general store. Martha Harmon ran the place with an iron fist and a sharp tongue. She was sorting through new stock when they walked in. "Eli Mercer," she said without looking up. "Heard you had company during the storm." "Word travels fast," Eli replied. "Word always travels fast when Owen Blackledge is involved." Martha finally looked up. Her eyes took in Maggie from head to toe. "You must be the Boston bride." Maggie lifted her chin. "I was meant to be. I am not anymore." Martha made a sound that might have been approval. "Smart girl. Owen Blackledge goes through wives like other men go through horses." She paused. "First one died of loneliness. Second one ran off with a traveling salesman. Third one? Well?" She glanced at Maggie. "You were supposed to be the third one." Maggie went pale. "I did not know there were others." "Course you did not," Martha said briskly. "Man like Owen does not advertise his failures." She started pulling supplies off the shelves. Sugar, coffee, salt, things Eli actually needed. "You staying with Mercer for now?" "Until I figure out my next step," Maggie said carefully. Martha nodded. Good. Safest place in the valley. Eli here has got a reputation for being honest and stubborn. Owen hates him for both reasons. She rang up the supplies and took Eli's money. Then she leaned across the counter and lowered her voice. Owen has been asking around about you, she said to Maggie, telling folks you are his property. That Eli stole you. She shook her head. Most folks know that is hogwash, but Owen has money. Money buys loud voices. Eli's jaw tightened. Let him talk. Talking is just the start, Martha warned. Owen does not like losing, and right now, he thinks he lost something valuable. They left the store with supplies and a warning. Eli loaded everything onto the horse while Maggie stood in the cold sunlight, her face troubled. He is going to come for me, she said quietly. I can feel it. Probably, Eli agreed, but he will have to go through me first. Maggie looked at him then. Really looked. And what she saw made her stand a little straighter. I do not want you to get hurt because of me, she said. Eli's eyes held hers. Some things are worth getting hurt for. It was the closest thing to a declaration either of them had made, and it hung in the cold air between them like a promise. The horses came down the trail at midday, single file, dark shapes against the melting snow. Eli saw them from the barn where he and Maggie were tending a new calf. The little thing had been born just after dawn, wet and perfect, still blinking at the world like it did not understand how cold everything was. Eli knew the big bay horse in front, knew the silver-studded saddle. Trouble had finally found its way to his door. He looked at Maggie. His voice was calm but firm. Go inside, he said. She did not argue. She walked steady toward the cabin. Not running, not dragging her feet either, just moving with purpose. Smart woman. Eli stepped out of the barn and positioned himself near the porch. The Winchester leaned against the wall within easy reach, but he did not pick it up. Civil for now. A man did not pour oil on a fire unless he had to. Owen Blackledge rode tall like he owned the wind itself. He sat his horse like a king surveying his kingdom. Sheriff Amos Hale rode beside him, looking stiff and uncomfortable in the saddle, like a man who had been asked to do a job he did not like. Two hired hands followed behind. Hard eyes, mean mouths, the kind of men Owen kept around for dirty work. They stopped in front of the porch where Eli stood waiting. Eli, Owen said. He touched his hat brim like they were meeting at church. Heard you have been harboring stolen property. Eli kept his voice mild and steady. Nothing stolen on my land, except maybe the peace you are disturbing. Sheriff Hale shifted uncomfortable in his saddle. Good man, Amos, but he was caught between the law and Owen's money like a rabbit in a snare. Blackledge says his bride is missing, the sheriff said reluctantly. Says she might be here. A woman came to my door in a blizzard, Eli answered simply. The Christian thing was giving shelter. Owen smiled, but it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a man who thought he had already won. My bride, Owen repeated. He leaned forward in his saddle. Bought and paid for. I have got receipts, train fare, arrangements, everything that makes her mine, under law. The cabin door opened behind Eli. Maggie stepped onto the porch. She wore her blue wool dress, mended and pressed. Her hair was pinned proper. Her back was straight as a rifle barrel. She looked like a schoolteacher about to correct bad arithmetic. Her eyes were calm, but Eli could see the steel underneath. I am not property, Mr. Blackledge, she said clearly. Her voice carried across the yard. Not yours, or anyone else's. Owen's face darkened. His hands tightened on the reins. I paid for you. You paid train fare, Maggie replied coolly. Then you abandoned me at a crossroads in a killing storm, with coach fare that would not buy a dog a night's shelter. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the termination paper. She held it up like a lantern in darkness. Your own writing says agreement terminated. No further obligation on either party. Sheriff Hale held out his hand. Maggie walked down the porch steps without trembling and gave him the paper. The sheriff read it slowly. His lips moved over the words like he wanted to make sure he understood everyone. Finally, he looked up at Owen. "Seems clear enough," the sheriff said carefully. "You terminated it yourself." Owen's jaw worked like he was chewing on something bitter. "That paper is not legal. She coerced me, threatened scandal." Maggie's voice went cold as winter ice. "I never spoke a word of threat. You took one look at me and decided I would not suit. Your exact words were too refined for ranch work." One of Owen's men, a rough-looking fellow named Jake Coulter, spat near Maggie's feet. "You saying you remember exact words from a week ago?" Maggie looked at him like he was dirt on a book page. "I am educated, Mr. Coulter. I remember everything, including how Mr. Blackledge told the station master to hold the eastbound train because the goods were not as advertised." Eli stepped forward then. He placed himself between Maggie and the mounted men. His hand was close to the Winchester now, not touching it, but ready. "She is free," Eli said firmly. "She stays or goes as she chooses." Owen's voice went ugly. "She is staying in your cabin, unmarried. What would folks say?" "Folks can say what they want," Eli replied. "Will not change the facts." Sheriff Hale cleared his throat. He looked like he wanted to be anywhere else, but he had a job to do. "Miss Doyle," he said formally, "are you here of your own free will?" "I am," Maggie answered clearly. "Anyone forcing you to stay?" "No." "Anyone taking?" The sheriff paused and cleared his throat again. "Liberties?" Maggie lifted her chin. "Mr. Mercer has been nothing but proper and protective, which is more than I can say for the man who abandoned me to freeze." Owen's hand dropped to his gun belt. Not on the gun itself, but close enough to send a message. Eli's hand found the Winchester, casual, like he was scratching an itch. "Careful with your threats, Owen," Eli said quietly. The moment stretched. Horses danced nervous in the snow. The hired men shifted in their saddles. Everyone could feel how close things were to going very wrong very fast. Sheriff Hale broke the tension before blood could be spilled. "This is a civil matter," he said firmly. "Not criminal. She is free to make her choices. Owen, you wrote that paper yourself. You cannot unwrite it now because you changed your mind." Owen's eyes locked on Eli's. They were full of a cold fury that promised this was not over. Not by a long shot. "This is not over," Owen said. His voice was low and dangerous. He was already turning his horse when Eli spoke again. "A woman like that staying with a man like you, unmarried," Owen said over his shoulder. "The whole valley will know by sundown." "Then they will know you threw her away first," Eli replied calmly. "And they might wonder why a successful rancher would abandon an educated, capable woman in a blizzard." Owen went still. Something flickered behind his eyes. Fear, maybe, or anger that someone had guessed too close to the truth. Without another word, he spurred his horse and rode away. His men followed in the cloud of snow in silence. Sheriff Hale stayed behind for one breath longer. "This will not end here," he warned quietly. He looked genuinely worried. "Owen has got pride and plans. You stepped on both." Eli did not flinch. "I stepped on nothing. I gave shelter." "That is not how he will tell it," the sheriff said. He tipped his hat to Maggie. "Ma'am." Then he rode away, leaving Eli and Maggie alone in front of the cabin. Inside, with the door barred and the fire built up high, Maggie finally let herself shake. The fear hit her after the danger passed. Her hands trembled as she sat at the table. Eli poured coffee and added a small splash of whiskey from the bottle he kept for medicinal purposes. Maggie drank, made a face at the burn, then steadied. "He will make the town hate me," she whispered. Some of it, Eli admitted. Not all. Money buys loud voices, but it does not buy every heart. I should leave, Maggie said. Her voice was hollow. Save you the trouble. Eli's eyes held hers. His voice was gentle but firm. Where would you go? He asked quietly. She had no answer. The truth sat heavy in the silence between them. She had no family, no home, no safe path back east. The world had narrowed to this cabin, this stove, this man. And for reasons she could not quite explain, that did not feel as frightening as it should have. A dead chicken appeared on their porch the next morning. It was not a mistake. It was not an accident. It was a warning. The bird had been strangled, not killed for food, left there in the early morning hours like a message written in death. Eli buried it without making a speech, but Maggie watched from the window, her jaw tight with anger. When he came back inside, brushing snow from his sleeves, she spoke before fear could swallow her courage. "Teach me to shoot," she said. Eli stopped. He studied her face for a long moment. City woman. Educated, but not soft, not quitting. "You sure?" he asked. "If I am staying," Maggie said firmly, "I need to be more than a guest. I need to be useful in every way this life demands." "All right," Eli said. He nodded slowly. "We will start with the rifle. It is steadier than a pistol." That afternoon he took her behind the cabin to a clearing where the snow had melted to bare brown earth. He set up tin cans on a fallen log about 30 yards out. Then he taught her. He showed her how to hold the Winchester, how to plant her feet solid, how to breathe out slow and squeeze the trigger, not yank it. He stood behind her, adjusting her stance, his hands gentle but sure. Her first shot jumped wide, kicking up snow 10 feet from the target. Her second hit dirt close to the can. Her third made the can jump off the log with a satisfying ping. "Not bad," Eli said. Maggie smiled for the first time in days. "Not bad for anyone," she corrected. Eli almost smiled back. Almost. They practiced until the light started to fade. By the time they went inside, Maggie could hit a can 6 times out of 10. Not perfect, but enough to make someone think twice. That evening, young Tommy Bright rode up to the cabin. He was maybe 17, all elbows and apologies. Hat in hand, eyes nervous. Tommy worked for Owen, but his conscience was louder than his pay. "The story is spreading," Tommy said quickly. He kept glancing over his shoulder like he expected Owen to appear at any moment. "Folks are saying you stole her, Mr. Mercer, saying you are living in sin." He swallowed hard. "But not everyone believes it. Mrs. Doc Patterson says any man who would abandon a woman in a blizzard deserves what he gets. Reverend Cole says he will come talk to you if you will let him." Eli nodded slowly. "I appreciate the warning, Tommy." The boy shifted on his feet. "I do not like what Mr. Blackledge is doing. It is not right. But he pays my wages, and my mama needs the money." "You do what you have to do," Eli said. "No judgment here." After Tommy rode away, Eli and Maggie sat by the fire. The world was pressing in on their quiet from all sides. Owen's lies, the town's whispers, the cold truth that this could not go on forever. Eli stared into the flames for a long time before speaking. "We could marry," he said finally. Maggie went very still. "Stop the talk," Eli continued. "Give you protection under the law. Make it harder for Owen to claim any kind of ownership." Maggie turned and looked at him. She was weighing his soul. He could feel it. "Is that what you want?" she asked quietly. "I want you safe," Eli said. His voice was rough around the edges. "I want you to have choices." "That is not what I asked," Maggie said. Eli's throat tightened. He had not felt this way about anyone in more years than he could count. Maybe ever. But he was not going to trap her with a proposal born of fear. "No," he admitted. "If we marry, it will not be because Owen Blackledge forced it. It will be because we choose it, freely, both of us." Maggie nodded once, satisfied with his answer. Then we wait, she said. Let them talk. The next few days were tense. More warnings appeared. A fence cut in the night. Strange tracks in the snow near the cabin. Small acts of harassment designed to wear them down. Eli fixed everything without complaint. He rode his property line every day, rifle in hand. Maggie kept practicing her shooting. And slowly something else began to grow between them. It was in the way Eli made sure her coffee was always hot, the way Maggie patched his coat without being asked, the way they talked late into the evening about books and dreams and the kind of life they might have wanted if the world had been kinder. One night, Maggie asked him why he had never married. Eli stared at the fire for a long time before answering. "I always thought I would," he said. "When I was young, there was a girl, Sarah Jennings. We were going to build a life together." He paused. "She died of fever the winter before we were supposed to wed." "I am sorry," Maggie said softly. "It was a long time ago." Eli's voice was distant. "After that, I guess I stopped trying. Easier to be alone than to lose someone again." Maggie reached out and took his hand. It was the first time she had touched him without practical reason, without needing warmth or balance or support. Just touch. Just connection. "I understand," she said. "After my father died, I thought I would be alone forever. I thought I had made peace with it." She looked at him. "Then I knocked on your door." Eli's fingers curled around hers. They sat like that for a long time, watching the fire, holding on to each other in the darkness. Sunday came cold and clear. The church was fuller than usual. Word had traveled fast, and curiosity filled the pews like smoke. Owen sat in front, confident as a king. His new Sunday suit was pressed perfect. His smile was wide and false. He shook hands with the important men and complimented their wives. Eli and Maggie sat in the back, her in her mended blue dress, him in his one good shirt. When the sermon ended, Reverend Cole cleared his throat. "Miss Doyle has asked to address the congregation," he announced, "regarding recent misunderstandings." Owen started to rise in protest, but Judge Harper, old and wise and tired of Owen's games, pulled him back down with a firm hand. Maggie walked to the front of the church. She did not tremble. She carried Owen's letters in her hands like weapons. "I came to Wyoming Territory in good faith," she began, her voice carried clear and strong, "answering Mr. Blackledge's advertisement for a wife. I sold everything I owned based on his written promises." She held up the letters for everyone to see. Then she told the whole truth. The station, the rejection, the crossroads and the storm, the termination paper. How Eli saved her life and never once took advantage. "If there is sin here," Maggie said, meeting the eyes of every person in the church, "it is not his, and it is not mine." Owen stood, his face red with fury. "Lies," he snapped. "She is twisting things." Maggie held up the termination paper. "You wrote these letters. You signed this. You abandoned me." She paused. "Those are facts, Mr. Blackledge. Would you like the congregation to read them for themselves?" The room murmured. People shifted like grass in the wind. Then Mrs. Doc Patterson stood up. Her voice was loud and certain. "I have seen this young woman tend the sick and teach children to read," she said. "That is more Christian than spreading lies about her." Old Tom Garrett stood next. His knees creaked, but his voice was strong. "Eli Mercer has helped every rancher in this valley," he declared. "Man like that does not deserve slander." One by one, more people stood. Not all. Some stayed quiet, their faces stiff with judgment. But enough rose that the air in the church changed. The scales were tipping. Owen looked around at the faces that were no longer afraid of him. His power had always depended on fear, and fear was leaving. He stormed out without another word, his pride trailing behind him like dust. That night, after the confrontation at the church, Eli brought out a small wooden box. It was old and worn, the kind of thing a man kept in a special place for decades. Inside lay a thin gold ring, worn smooth by years of use. "This was my mother's," Eli said quietly. He did not look at Maggie as he spoke. "I am not asking you to wear it yet, but I want you to have it, so you know it is yours, if you are ever ready." Maggie held the ring up to the lamplight. It caught the glow and seemed to warm in her fingers. Simple, beautiful, full of history. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "It is simple," Eli said. "Those are not different things," Maggie answered. She set the box on the shelf between his books and her sewing basket, where it belonged. Then she turned and kissed him. It was quick, almost shy, the kind of kiss that asks a question more than answers one. But it was real. And when she pulled back, Eli was looking at her like she had given him something precious. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For not giving up on me." Eli took her hands in his. They were rough from work, but gentle. "I do not think I could if I tried," he admitted. They stood like that for a long moment. Two people who had been alone for too long, finally finding something worth holding on to. Then a rock crashed through the window. Glass exploded across the floor. Sharp fragments scattered everywhere, glittering in the firelight like frozen tears. No note, no message needed. Owen Blackledge was not done. Eli pulled Maggie away from the window. He pushed her behind him and grabbed the Winchester in one smooth motion. His eyes scanned the darkness outside, but whoever had thrown the rock was already gone. The coward did not even have the courage to face them. Eli spent the next hour boarding up the window while Maggie swept glass with steady hands. Neither of them spoke about fear. Neither of them needed to. When the work was done, Maggie looked at the boarded window and then at Eli. "He is escalating," she said quietly. "Let him," Eli replied. "Every rock he throws proves you were right to refuse him." "I was not refusing him," Maggie said. Her eyes were bright with something fierce. "He refused who he thought I was. I am refusing who he is." The next morning, 5 women came to the cabin. Mrs. Johnson, Mrs. Patterson, Mrs. Harmon from the store, and 2 others Maggie did not know by name. Their faces were serious, but not hostile. "We want to hire you," Mrs. Johnson said quickly, "to teach our daughters. Real schooling, not just recipes and stitching." Maggie's breath caught in surprise. "Where would I teach?" "The church hall," Mrs. Patterson said. "Tuesdays and Thursdays." Reverend Cole agreed. Maggie looked at Eli. He stood in the doorway watching. He did not speak, but his eyes said the same thing his shelter had always said. "Your choice." "All right," Maggie said firmly, "but I teach any girl who wants to learn, no matter who her family is." Mrs. Johnson nodded fast. "Agreed." After the women left, Eli sat back in his chair like he had just watched a river change course. "Teacher again," he said. Maggie smiled. "It is who I am." Spring crept closer with each passing day. Snow melted in slow patches. The creek began to run louder. Birds returned to the pine trees. The world was waking up, and Maggie was building a life. She taught in the church hall twice a week. Girls arrived shy at first, then hungry for knowledge. Their mothers came too, pretending it was only to escort their daughters. But they lingered at the back to listen. Maggie's voice filled that room like sunlight. She taught reading and writing, arithmetic and history. She taught them that their minds were valuable, that education was not just for men in cities, that knowledge was power, and power belonged to anyone smart enough to claim it. Word spread. More families sent their daughters. Even a few boys started showing up, though they pretended they were just walking their sisters to the door. Owen heard about all of it, and his fury grew. He spread more lies. Maggie was a fallen woman. Eli was taking advantage of her. They were mocking the institution of marriage. He paid men to whisper in the saloon and women to gossip after church. But for every lie he told, truth told a better story. People saw Maggie teaching their children. They saw Eli working his land with honest hands. They saw two people building something real, not tearing anything down. And slowly, very slowly, the valley began to shift. Not everyone, of course. Owen still had money. Money still bought loud voices. But the quiet voices were growing louder too. The ones that remembered kindness. The ones that valued truth. One evening, after a long day of teaching, Maggie came home to find Eli waiting on the porch. He held a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "What is that?" Maggie asked. Eli handed it to her without a word. Inside the cloth was a hand-carved sign. Smooth pine with letters burned into the wood. Miss Doyle's School for Young Ladies. Maggie's eyes filled with tears. She looked at Eli, and everything she felt was written on her face. "You made this," she said. "I did," Eli confirmed. "Thought it might look nice on the church hall door." Maggie threw her arms around him. She held on tight, and Eli held her back. Two people who had found each other in a storm, finally admitting what they had known for weeks. "I love you," Maggie whispered into his shoulder. Eli's arms tightened around her. "I love you too," he said. "Have for a while now." They stood on the porch as the sun set over the mountains. The sky turned orange and pink and gold. The world was beautiful. And for the first time since she had left Boston, Maggie felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. But Owen Blackledge was not finished, and his next move would be his most desperate yet. Owen made his move on a cold spring morning. He rode out at dawn with Jake Coulter and two other hired men. They cut Eli's north fence again, just like they had before, but this time they did more than cut wire. They drove two of Eli's calves into the timber. Young ones, new ones, the babies born in winter. They left them there to die in the cold. It was cruelty for the sake of power, nothing more. Eli found the tracks at first light. His face went stone hard in a way Maggie had never seen before. The gentle man who carved spoons and taught her to shoot was gone. In his place was something older, fiercer. Maggie stood beside him, looking at the cut fence and the tracks leading into the trees. She did not ask him to stay calm. She did not ask him to be gentle. She only said, "We go after them." Eli looked at her. "You sure?" Maggie lifted the Winchester. Her hands were steady. Her eyes were clear. "You taught me for a reason," she said. They followed the trail into the trees. The air smelled of wet pine and thawing earth. Birds sang in the branches like they did not know men could be evil. They found the calves first, huddled together in a small clearing, shivering but alive. Maggie knelt beside them, soothing them with her voice. Calm as a lullaby. Eli's chest loosened with relief. Then a branch snapped behind them. Jake Coulter stepped from behind a tree. His rifle was raised. His smile was ugly. "Should have left her at the station, Mercer," Jake sneered. "Boss says you are costing him money." Eli's hand moved toward his gun, but Maggie was faster. She lifted the Winchester and aimed, steady as stone. The barrel pointed straight at Jake's chest. "Drop it," she said. Her voice was sharp as ice. Jake laughed. It was the laugh of a man who did not take women seriously. "You ain't going to shoot," he said. Maggie's eyes did not blink. "I do not want to," she said clearly. "But I will." Jake hesitated. And in that hesitation, Eli saw something shift in the man's face. Fear. Not of Eli. Of Maggie. Because she was not playing a man's game. She was not bluffing or posturing. She was protecting what was hers. Jake lowered his rifle just a little. Then a shot cracked from somewhere behind them. The bullet hit a tree near Eli's shoulder. Bark exploded in splinters. Another man was hidden in the woods, a coward with a rifle. Eli shoved Maggie down behind a stump. "Stay low," he hissed. Maggie's heart hammered in her chest. But she obeyed. Then she did something Eli did not expect. She crawled sideways through the brush, quiet and sure, using the trees as cover, moving like she had been born to this land instead of Boston's streets. She came up on Jake's flank, different angle, different position. She aimed again. This time her shot hit the ground inches from Jake's boot. He jumped like the devil had bitten him. His rifle dropped fully to the snow. "All right," Jake shouted, his voice cracked with fear. "All right!" Eli sprang forward. He grabbed Jake by the collar and slammed him against a tree. "Who shot?" Eli growled. Jake's eyes darted wildly. "Tommy," he spat. "Tommy Bright. He ain't as sweet as he looks." Eli's stomach turned. Tommy, the boy who had warned them, the boy whose guilt had seemed so real. A shape moved in the trees. Another crack. The second shot came too close for comfort. Maggie lifted her rifle one more time. She did not aim at Tommy. She aimed at the branch above where the shooter was hiding. The shot was perfect. The branch snapped and fell with a heavy crash. Leaves and snow and broken wood came down in a shower. A young man stumbled from the brush, eyes wild, face pale, Tommy Bright. He looked at Maggie like he had never seen anyone like her before, like he could not believe what had just happened. "He said he would pay me," Tommy shouted. His voice was breaking apart. "He said he would make me foreman. I am tired of being nothing." Maggie lowered her rifle, but she did not lower her voice. "You are not nothing," she said fiercely, "but you are becoming a murderer." Tommy's hand shook. His rifle dipped toward the ground. He looked like a boy again, just a scared kid who had made a terrible choice. Eli stepped forward slowly. His hands were open. His voice was calm. "Put it down, Tommy," he said gently. "Do not make one bad choice become your whole life." Tommy's face crumpled. Tears streamed down his cheeks. He dropped the rifle and sank to his knees in the thawing mud. He cried like a child, because that is what he was. They brought the calves home first. Life mattered more than revenge. The little animals stumbled and bawled, but made it back to the warm barn. Then Eli rode to town with Jake and Tommy under guard. Straight to Sheriff Hale. This time, there was proof. Tracks, witnesses, confession. When Owen Blackledge heard, he came riding fast, fury in his face, ready to crush this problem with money like he always did. But the valley was watching now. Sheriff Hale stood on the porch of the jail with his rifle across his knees. Reverend Cole stood beside him. Mrs. Patterson stood behind them both like a wall. "You have done enough," the sheriff said firmly. "Jake and Tommy are in custody, and I'm taking your name down for inciting it." Owen laughed, but the sound was weak. "You think you can touch me?" Old Tom Garrett stepped out of the crowd. "You burned Mercer's barn 2 years back," he said. "We all knew it, never could prove it." Mrs. Harmon stepped forward too. Her chin was high, her voice was loud. "You threatened my store account when I would not spread your lies," she said. "You do not own us." Mr. Johnson raised his voice from the back. "You have been buying judges and bullying men long enough," he declared. "Not anymore." Owen stared around at the faces that were no longer afraid. His money had not changed, but the valley had. His eyes landed on Maggie. She stood beside Eli, calm and unbowed. "You did this," Owen said. His voice was hollow. "No," Maggie replied. "You did this. I just stopped letting you write my life." Owen looked like he wanted to spit, to shout, to pull a gun and force the world back into the shape he liked. But even he could see it. If he fired, the valley would rise against him. His power had always depended on fear, and fear was gone. He turned his horse with a savage jerk. "This is not over," he snapped. Eli's voice carried across the crowd. Calm, final, certain. "It is over," he said. "You just do not know it yet." Spring came like a quiet promise kept. The mud dried under a warming sun. The creek ran full and loud with snowmelt. The first green shoots pushed through the soil behind the cabin where Maggie planted a small garden. Eli rebuilt his fence with help from neighbors who showed up without being asked. They brought tools and lumber and wives with food. They worked side by side, saying little but meaning much. The valley had changed. Owen Blackledge still owned the biggest spread. He still had more money than most families saw in a lifetime, but his power was broken. The fear that had propped him up for years had evaporated like morning mist. He stayed on his ranch now, alone with his bitterness, watching the world move on without him. Maggie continued teaching in the church hall. Her classes grew larger every week. Girls who had never held a book learned to read. Girls who had never seen a number learned arithmetic. Girls who had been told they were only good for marriage, and babies learned they could be anything they wanted. Their parents saw it too, saw their daughters change, saw confidence grow where fear had been. And slowly, quietly, Maggie became part of the community. Not a stranger from Boston, not the mail-order bride, just Maggie, teacher, neighbor, friend. One evening, after a long day of teaching and farming, Eli came into the cabin looking nervous. Maggie had never seen him nervous before. He faced down armed men without flinching. He survived Wyoming winters alone for 30 years, but now his hands were shaking slightly. "What is wrong?" Maggie asked. "Nothing is wrong," Eli said quickly. Then he laughed at himself. "I am just not good at this." "Good at what?" Eli took a breath. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small ring. It was not his mother's ring. This one was new. Simple gold, bought with the little money he had saved over years of hard work. "I bought this in town last week," Eli said. His voice was rough with emotion. "I told myself I would wait until the time was right. But I have been waiting my whole life for something. I do not want to wait anymore." Maggie's breath caught. Her hand went to her throat. "Eli," she whispered. "I am not asking because the valley is talking," he continued. His eyes held hers, steady and true. "I am not asking because Owen forced our hand. I am asking because I cannot imagine this cabin without you in it." He paused. "I am asking because I love you, and I think maybe you love me too." Maggie's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling through them. "I waited for the right reason," she said softly, "and now I have it." She held out her hand. Eli slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been made for her. "Is that a yes?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "That is a yes," Maggie confirmed. They married under open sky on a perfect spring morning. Not in the church, not with fancy decorations or expensive clothes. Just the two of them, and a handful of neighbors and a borrowed Bible. Reverend Cole performed the ceremony. His words were simple and true. Mrs. Patterson cried through the whole thing. Old Tom Garrett coughed and pretended he had dust in his eyes. Martha Harmon from the store brought a cake she had made herself. It was lopsided and a little burnt on one side, but it was the best cake Maggie had ever tasted. When it was over, Eli kissed his wife, really kissed her, in front of everyone, and nobody said a word against it. They spent their wedding night in the cabin, the same cabin where Maggie had knocked on the door, half frozen, the same cabin where Eli had saved her life. But it felt different now. Fuller, warmer. Like it had been waiting for this moment. In the weeks that followed, they built a life together. Real partnership. Eli worked the land while Maggie kept the books and managed the household. She learned to mend fences and birth calves. He learned to cook more than beans and biscuits. They talked late into the night about everything and nothing. They laughed at jokes only they understood. They made plans for the future. A bigger garden, more cattle, maybe even children someday. It was a good life, simple but rich. But Owen Blackledge was not finished. A week after the wedding, smoke rose from the hay barn. Maggie saw it first. She was in the garden when the smell hit her. Burning wood, burning hay. She looked up and her blood went cold. "Fire!" she screamed. Eli came running from the house. Neighbors came running from the road. Within minutes, half the valley had gathered to fight the flames. The fire was hungry. It ate the roof first, then the walls. Sparks flew like angry bees, threatening to spread to the cabin, to the livestock, to everything Eli had built. But the valley fought back. Maggie organized the water line from the creek. Eli and the men beat at the flames with wet blankets. Women hauled buckets and soaked the ground around the cabin. They worked through the afternoon and into the evening, exhausted, Terrified, determined, when the fire finally died, the hay barn was gone, collapsed into a smoking ruin. But the cabin stood. The livestock was safe. The home survived. Eli and Maggie stood in the blackened, sodden mess. Soot covered their faces. Their hands were blistered and raw. Their muscles screamed with exhaustion. But they were alive, and they were together. "We will rebuild," Maggie said quietly. Eli nodded. "We will." That night in the cabin that smelled of smoke and fresh bread, Eli sat beside his wife and wrapped her blistered hands with gentle bandages, the same gentle touch that had pulled her from the blizzard all those months ago. Maggie leaned her head on his shoulder. "Your mother's ring is gone," she whispered. It had been in the barn, in a box of keepsakes she was organizing. Eli was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Rings can be replaced." Maggie shook her head. "That one cannot." Eli turned her face toward his. His eyes were soft. "You are right," he admitted. "It cannot. But I have this." He touched her hand where the new ring gleamed. "I have you. I have a home. That is enough." Maggie kissed him then, soft and sweet, a promise renewed. The evidence was clear. One of Owen's hired men, drunk in the saloon, bragged about setting the fire. He thought he was among friends. He was wrong. Within a day, Sheriff Hale had a witness. Within 2 days, he had a confession. And within 3 days, Owen Blackledge was standing before Judge Harper in the town courtroom. The charges were serious: arson, destruction of property, endangering lives. The judge was not smiling. Owen hired the best lawyer money could buy, a slick man from Cheyenne who wore a fancy suit and talked down to everyone in the room. But it did not matter. Witness after witness came forward. People who had been afraid to speak before. People who remembered other fires, other threats, other acts of cruelty that Owen thought he had gotten away with. Old Tom Garrett testified about the barn Owen burned 2 years ago. Martha Harmon testified about the threats to her store. The Johnsons testified about cattle that went missing. Suspicious accidents that seemed too convenient. Years of wickedness laid bare in the courtroom. Owen's lawyer tried every trick: objections, delays, character attacks. But Judge Harper was having none of it. "This is not a court that can be bought," the judge said sternly. "And I am not a man who can be frightened." When it was Maggie's turn to speak, she told her story simply and clearly. The letters, the abandonment, the storm, the rock through the window, the attack in the woods, the fire. She did not cry. She did not beg for sympathy. She just spoke the truth, and the truth was damning. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Guilty on all counts. Owen Blackledge stood pale and shaking as the verdict was read. His fancy lawyer had already left town. His hired men had scattered like rats from a sinking ship. He was alone. The judge sentenced him to 15 years in the territorial prison. His ranch would be sold to pay restitution to everyone he had harmed, including Eli and Maggie. As the deputies led Owen away in chains, he passed close to Maggie, close enough to speak. "You ruined me," he hissed. Maggie looked at him without fear, without anger, without anything but calm certainty. "No," she said quietly. "I just stopped letting you ruin anyone else." Owen had no answer to that. He was still silent when the prison wagon carried him away. That night the whole valley celebrated. There was music in the church hall, food spread on long tables, dancing that went on past midnight. Everyone came, young and old, rich and poor, all the people who had lived in Owen's shadow for too long. Eli and Maggie danced together in the middle of the floor, not fancy dancing, just holding each other and swaying to the music. "How does it feel?" Eli asked. "Being free of him?" Maggie smiled. "I was free of him the moment I knocked on your door," she said. "This is just the world catching up." Eli pulled her closer. "I love you, Mrs. Mercer." "I love you too, Mr. Mercer." They danced until their feet hurt. Then they danced some more. Outside, the stars shone bright over Wyoming, the same stars that had watched over Maggie's desperate walk through the blizzard, the same stars that had seen Eli open his door to a stranger. Everything had changed since then. Everything had become exactly what it was supposed to be. 5 years later, the cabin had grown, 2 new rooms added for the children, a proper porch where Maggie could sit in the evening and watch the sunset, a garden that produced more vegetables than they could eat. The barn had been rebuilt, bigger and stronger than before, paid for with the restitution money from Owen's estate. The school had grown too. A proper building now, not just the church hall. Miss Doyle's school for young ladies had become a real institution. Girls came from 3 counties to learn. Some of them went on to become teachers themselves. Some became businesswomen, some stayed on the land and raised families. But all of them remembered Maggie's lesson. You can be anything you want to be. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. On this particular evening, Maggie sat on the porch with her youngest child on her lap, a little girl with her father's steady eyes and her mother's copper hair. Eli came up from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He was older now, a little gray in his hair, a few more lines on his face, but his eyes were the same, warm, true, full of love. "Supper ready?" he asked. "Almost," Maggie said. She lifted the little girl toward him. "Your daughter wants to show you something first." The girl held up a piece of paper. On it, in shaky but proud letters, she had written her name, Elizabeth. Named for Eli's mother, the woman who had made this cabin into a home long before Maggie ever arrived. Eli took the paper like it was made of gold. He looked at his daughter with such pride that Maggie felt tears prick her eyes. "That is beautiful," Eli said softly. "Did Mama teach you?" Elizabeth nodded proudly. "I am going to be a teacher too," she announced, "just like Mama." Eli picked up his daughter and held her close. "You can be anything you want," he told her. "Remember that." Elizabeth giggled and squirmed. "I want to be a teacher and a cowboy and a princess, all at once?" Eli laughed. "All at once." Maggie stood and joined her family. She wrapped her arms around them both. "Then you will be," she said, "all at once." Later that night, after the children were in bed and the fire was burning low, Eli and Maggie sat together on the porch. The stars were out, the same stars that had watched over them for 5 years now. "Do you ever think about how we met?" Maggie asked quietly. "Every day," Eli admitted. "I thank God for that blizzard." Maggie laughed softly. "Most people do not thank God for storms." Eli pulled her closer. "Most people do not find their whole life in a storm." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds. The wind in the pines, the creek running in the distance, the peaceful breathing of a world at rest. "I love this life," Maggie said finally. "I love you," Eli replied. And that was enough. It had always been enough. A good man opened his door in a storm. A strong woman walked through it. Together they built something that would last longer than winter, longer than gossip, longer than any man who ever thought love could be bought or sold. They built a home. They built a family. They built a life. And they lived it together, every single day. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.